On February 21st, 1981, Robert Zemeckis and Bob Gale completed the first draft of their screenplay, Back to the Future. To those who got the pitch, the reaction was mixed. It was too provocative for Disney and not provocative enough for any other studio. But in 1984, the project got the green light. From there, Zemeckis and company went through rewrites, recasts, reshoots, and a 220-page screenplay called Paradox that got split into 2 films. At the end of it all, the filmmakers came away with one of the most satisfying journeys of their lives. And thanks to their story, film fans to this day celebrate the pure awesomeness of the Back to the Future trilogy. Shall we? Back to the Future. I love this movie. The story follows Marty McFly as he is accidentally sent back in time to 1955 via a time-traveling DeLorean invented by his friend, Dr. Emmett Brown. While in the past, he must make sure his parents unite in high school. Things get complicated when he meets his mom and she forms a crush on him. Marty then befriends his father, George, and desperately tries to get him to connect with his mom at the school dance. If he doesn't, he will cease to exist. Having been born in the early 90s, I was unfortunately denied the chance to see this upon its initial release in theaters. I heard a lot about it growing up, but it wasn't actually until I reached community college, which was like 5 years ago, I think so, 5 years ago, that I actually sat down and watched it, finally. To be honest, my reaction was not positive, but I had a gut feeling that one day, with time, I would see the film differently. I wanted to like it, genuinely, but for whatever reason, at that time, the material and I just were not, gelling. Since that time, a lot's happened, but thankfully time has been good to me. I have grown both as a person and as a film lover, and based on the knowledge I've gained over the past 5 years, I feel like something within that helped me see this film differently, because when I watched it again for this video, I saw things very differently. Now, what exactly I saw differently, I can't quite pinpoint. I just know something changed, and I'm actually really quite thankful for that. One of the most remarkable things about this film is how Zemeckis and Gale wrote the exposition into the beginning without it coming off as boring and blatant. A lot of their colleagues were afraid that viewers would check out before the adventure even began, but both Zemeckis and Gale remained confident and held tight to their beliefs. In the end, it paid off. The adventure offered to us is one that few, if any, other films like this will ever top. And that is thanks to an ambitious vision and the passionate thought that went into every creative choice. From the design of the DeLorean, to the physical time travel effect, all the way down to Marty McFly's attire. Everything is driven by story and character, and it works. From a directing standpoint, Robert Zemeckis was hot off Romancing the Stone with Michael Douglas. And from that project, he brought along DP Dean Cundey. Together, they planned out and shot ambitious camera moves that tell a lot of story without any cutting. To some, it was Zemeckis putting more thought and focus on the camera and less on the actors, but as many shots prove, the actors deliver, and a little bit of thought goes a long way. Speaking of which, I freaking love the cast of this movie. Writing strong characters is one thing. Zemeckis is good at that. It's quite another as a director to cast that role and make it really work and bring it to the next level. And Zemeckis is one of those directors who just nails that. In this film, absolutely an example. I mean, Michael J. Fox, Christopher Lloyd, Crispin Glover, Leia Thompson, Thomas Wilson. Oof, so good. I just wish now, that I could have been there on the day of release in '85. That would have been amazing. Anyways, dream that will never happen. I give Back to the Future 5 out of 5 stars. We travel now to 2015 for part 2, which, in my opinion, is a worthy successor. The story follows Marty and Doc as they arrive in 2015 so that Marty can help his future son avoid making a big mistake. While there, he spots a sports almanac that, if brought back to 1985, will make him rich. But thanks to Doc and his insistence that Marty not use time travel as a means to get rich, the book is left behind, only to be found by the older Biff. Once he acquires the book, he uses the DeLorean to go back in time to make himself rich. As a result, when Marty and Doc return to 1985, they find themselves in a completely different reality, one where Biff is Marty's father and George McFly is dead. Marty and Doc then devise a plot to go back in time to 1955 to make sure Biff never gets the almanac. If they fail, all hope will be lost. With the success of the first movie, a sequel became possible. Zemeckis and Gale were both dubious, but ultimately agreed, knowing that without them, Universal would make a follow-up anyway. All the team wished for was to have the same cast. It did not work out for Crispin Glover, but thankfully, every other member of the cast was game and went on to make a sequel they hoped every fan would love. For me, this movie is an example of a project that, despite having a lot riding on it, did not let expectation crush it. Gale wrote a very ambitious screenplay, and the filmmakers could have easily taken it and just made it without much thought, knowing it would make money regardless. But they didn't. Part 2 has a lot of fire behind it, and it does something that typically happens in the third film of a trilogy. It plays off the events of the first movie. We get to see Marty avoid Marty. It adds a layer of tension and allows for a fun moment between 1955 Doc and 2015 Doc. And then of course there's alternate 1985, aka Hell. It's a depressing sequence, but from a production design standpoint, there's plenty of eye candy. Both the exteriors and interiors are ripe with detail. The same is true of the 2015 scenes. Zemeckis and his team may not have correctly predicted the look and feel of 2015, but their creativity speaks for itself. One scene of particular excellence is the hovercraft chase. Thanks to movie magic and editing, it's a lot of fun. My notes for improvement fall under the writing and the direction. While in 2015, Marty encounters his son as well as Biff's son, Griff. They're both necessary for the story, but how Zemeckis had Fox and Wilson play those characters was, for me, a little too ridiculous and over the top. As for the writing, the structure is very impressive, but personally I found it frustrating how the primary job of the dialogue is to explain story elements. I mean, yes, we do get visuals for some of that dialogue, but I guess just, after the first film, I was hoping we wouldn't have to spend that much time listening to exposition. Then again, compared to Tomorrowland, yeah. On the upside, this film does what any good sequel should do. It satisfies, but leaves you wanting more. I give Part 2 4 out of 5 stars. We travel now to 1885 for Part 3, which, in my opinion, is pretty good. The story sees Marty reuniting with Doc in 1955. He is armed with a letter from Doc sent from 1885. It ignites a search that leads to the discovery of a tombstone with Doc's name on it. It also names Mad Dog Tannen as the reason why he dies. Upon learning this, Marty decides to go back in time to 1885 to prevent his friend's death, whatever the cost. For me, Part 3 is a reminder that even if you have a great story and great characters, you can still basically run into issues. And for some reason, I don't know why this is, but more often than not, even when very talented filmmakers like Zemeckis get to the third film, they just kind of run out of steam. Then again, when you're filming 2 films back to back and your schedule is very tight and expectation is sky high, yeah, it can be pretty grueling. The good news is we are in a brand new setting, the Wild West. And while I'm personally not a big fan of that setting, one other new element that works really well is the romance between Doc and Clara Clayton. Chemistry is very hard to get right, but when it works, you don't think twice about it. And in the case of Christopher Lloyd and Mary Steenburgen, you don't even think once. And really, when looking back on this franchise, these films, more so than time travel, are about relationships, best friends, enemies, parents, lovers. And how, no matter what year we're in, be it 1885, 1955, 1985, or 2015, all of them help shape who we are. A favorite moment I have is when Marty is at Doc's place, and he tries to convince him he's real and not imaginary. Doc escapes into a room, leaving Marty out in the hall. Marty then belts out a hilarious line that features every year in the overall story timeline. The line itself is a migraine, but Fox's delivery is outstanding. My notes for improvement fall under the believability, story choices, and the pacing. In the beginning, we watch Doc read a letter he sent from 1885 to Marty in the future. It details where he is and what he's up to. It also says Marty should not go back in time to see him for fear of altering time. The letter is not only long, but we are forced to watch Doc read the whole thing. Visually, it's pretty boring. I feel like in that scene we could have found Doc finishing the letter, then watched him summarize major points to Marty. It takes less time and moves the story forward faster. With regard to story choices, I liked seeing the Wild West version of Biff. But a big part of me wanted to see that character begin as a nice guy, and then through some event we could learn the origin of his behavior, why he acts in part 1 and 2 like an a-hole. Last but not least, there is the believability. Several times throughout this film there are choices that must be made that will affect both Marty and Doc. One example is when Doc declares his desire to stay with Clara and have Marty go home by himself. It's a very important choice, and yet there's no real discussion between the two. Marty says like one line and then Doc decides to go with him. Now see, if he was truly in love, if Doc was truly in love, he would have put up an argument. All that said, my overall feeling on part 3 is that it is not as satisfying as it could have been, but it is still serviceable. I give part 3 3 out of 5 stars. To close this out, I will say that while this franchise is not one of my personal favorites, it is for me a good example of a story that can grow on someone. So hopefully, if you, right now, don't like this film or this series, hopefully later in life you will like it eventually, like I did, because, it's never hurts to give a film a second chance, usually. Anyways, thank you very much for your time and support. I sincerely appreciate it. Have an awesome day.